In today's video, we're going to take a look at some upgrades for the Endless Punishment Precon deck, which is going to be releasing officially next week, but will actually be available at some locations as of tomorrow when I'm recording this. So let's jump into the video and take a look at some upgrades. Thank you so much, everyone, for being here. I do appreciate each and every one of you guys taking the time to watch the video. Be sure to hit the like button if you do enjoy, and click that subscribe button if you want to be subscribed to the channel. Click the bell icon to be notified when new videos are posted. And yeah, about 90% of people who watch these videos regularly are not subscribed, so if even a few of you took just a minute to subscribe, it would be a huge help for the channel for me to continue producing content at the consistency that I'm trying to do it. So the precons are coming out officially the 27th, like I said in the intro, but your stores, LCSs and stuff should actually have them tomorrow, technically. I don't know how much they'll be. As of the time of this video, the Endless Punishment Precon is actually far more expensive on the secondary market than any of the others. You can get the other three on Amazon for under $45, give or take, but I haven't been able to find this deck anywhere cheaper than like 70 plus. And I'm not really sure if that's just because there's some decent reprints in there, or if people are hyped about it. I do think Valgavoth himself is a really cool character design, and I actually like the card a lot. But I don't personally think that the Valgavoth leader, geez, you see I'm crossing over my games here. The Valgavoth commander is as good, but in my video talking about that, a lot of people actually said, like, you're wrong, like, there's so many ways to make this work. So I acknowledge that fact, and I'm trying to look at some upgrades for this. But first, let's just quickly go over Valgavoth himself, just in case anyone is unfamiliar with the card. So he is the face commander for the deck. So we're assuming that you're using this card as the face commander for the purpose of this build. If you were to be using the Lord of Pain, there'd probably be some different ways to approach it. Maybe we'll make a follow-up video on that if people want to see it. But Valgavoth is 2, 1 black, 1 red, legendary creature, Elder Demon with flying and ward, pay 2 life. Whenever an opponent loses life for the first time during each of their turns, put a +1/+1 counter on Valgavoth and draw a card. So, in theory, you can technically, if you build this right and play this right, you can draw 3 cards each round and get counters on Valgavoth, and of course he does have ward, but like I said in the initial video talking about this, that ward effect is not, in my opinion anyway, as devastating, because it is pretty easy to just pay the 2 life, especially in Commander, and remove it, but you obviously want to support him with other stuff and have ways to maybe bring him back. So let's talk about some cards that will actually be really good. We're going to have, this video is going to be two sections. First section, we're going to talk about some cards you can add as upgrades. In the second section, we're going to talk about some cards you can take out. Obviously, it's really up to you and your play style and preferences. This isn't meant to serve as like a definitive way to build this deck. It's more so just, a lot of times, I know even myself, when I'm getting a new Commander deck, I look for some upgrades, look for what can I put in. So it's nice to have a starting point. And so I've kind of been trying to put some stuff together, and that's kind of what we're going to talk about here. So first up, we've got Zozu the Punisher. This card is actually, it's annoying, but it's good. It's 1 and 2 red legendary goblin warrior. It says whenever a land enters the battlefield, Zozu the Punisher deals 2 damage to that land's controller. So obviously you see where this works really well with Valgavoth, because anytime your opponent plays a land, they're going to take 2 life, then they're going to trigger Valgavoth's effect. So if you have this out, you basically, I mean, your opponents in most cases aren't going to want to skip a land drop for whatever reason. And so it's going to be a pretty easy way to kind of get Valgavoth going. The downside, of course, is that you take damage when you play lands as well. But again, we're working with a lot of life in a format like this, and obviously there are definitely some ways to kind of maybe get him off the field, or find ways to. I don't think this card's going to last super long on the board anyway. Your opponents are more than likely going to want to get him off the field sooner rather than later, but at least you can probably get a round or 2 out of him and generate some guaranteed card advantage using Valgavoth's effect, which I think is pretty good. Underworld Dreams is a card that I have always really liked, and it's funny in like a shouldered commander deck too. This one is 3 black enchantment. Whenever an opponent draws a card, Underworld Dreams deals 1 damage to that player. Obviously, you can kind of see exactly how this works. You play it, your opponent draws, it triggers Valgavoth, boom, pretty simple. It's only 1 damage, but it's just enough to kind of get that trigger going. And if your opponent is playing other cards that allow them to draw, you can deal extra damage just as an added bonus. It's going to like punish them for playing draw cards. And in the shoulder deck that I was referencing, there's different ways to do this where you can actually like force your opponent to draw and then ping them for damage, or it's a fun card, and it works really well within Valgavoth and what you're trying to do. Roiling Vortex is a good one, and I like this one a lot because it's low to the ground, like it's a very low mana cost, which is obviously nice early in the game. This is an enchantment at the beginning of each player's upkeep. Roiling Vortex deals 1 damage to that player. Whenever a player casts a spell, if no mana was spent to cast it, Rolling Vortex deals 5 damage to that player. And then you can pay 1 red to make it so your opponents can't gain life this turn. So it does a lot of things, but obviously just being able to trigger that 1 damage during the upkeep is pretty good. And I don't know how, there are obviously a lot of decks that play spells that aren't spent with mana. Plenty of lower cards that are low to the ground, like Mishra's Bauble and things of that nature. But in general, the elementals can be cast without paying mana. There's tons of cascading, you can bypass the mana cost there. So there are some ways to sort of like have the ability to hit your opponents a little harder with this. But it's just, it only costs 2 mana, and it's a nice way to kind of get going so you can start your resource engine, which I think is important. Mana Barbs is another one that kind of does something very similar to Underworld Dreams. It's except it's tapping instead of drawing, but it's 3 and a red enchantment. Whenever a player taps a land for mana, Mana Barbs deals 1 damage to that player. So again, this does hurt you, technically speaking, but it's also a very easy way to get your opponents to start taking some damage. It's a super annoying card that, like I said, is probably going to be something the opponents want to get off the board, so you're going to want to try to have, either ways to protect your cards, or at least ways to maybe get some of them back, or keep a steady flow of cards active so you're always able to hit Valgavoth's triggers without having to worry about, your whole strategy kind of falling apart. But the benefit to that, of course, is that you're drawing a lot of cards, so you should be able to draw into a lot of the answers that you need to kind of make this work. Dark Ritual, another card that's not included in the deck, just a really good card that I think is solid, and it's also pretty budget friendly. But being able to get that extra mana, if you open a mountain, you can basically turn 2, play Valgavoth with Dark Ritual, which is, pretty darn solid way to get him out early, and then just kind of start going. And the earlier he's out in a lot of matchups, he's not going to be as easy to remove on the first couple of turns. In most cases, unless the opponent opens like a single mana removal, which, can happen. It's obviously just the nature of it here. Wound Reflection's one I kind of like. This is 5 and a black enchantment. At the beginning of each end step, each opponent loses life equal to the life they lost this turn. Damage causes loss of life. It's a little costly for me. I don't love that aspect of it, but there are certainly some cards in here that are, more on the costly side that aren't all that great in my opinion. So it's not like you can't take it out. But it's just an interesting card that I think is worth considering if you are looking to really kind of do a lot of life. If you're building the deck around just dealing damage consistently, this basically doubles all the damage that's dealt. So in addition to allowing you to trigger Valgavoth, you're also putting extra pressure on the opponents and ideally kind of moving the game forward. Gix, Yawgmoth Praetor. I have to say, this one was not one I personally came up with. I saw someone else suggest it, but I just wanted to include it as a bit of an honorable mention. It's 1 and 2 black, legendary creature, Phyrexian Praetor. Whenever a creature deals combat damage to one of your opponents, its controller may pay 1 life. If they do, draw a card, and then you can pay 4 and 3 black, discard X cards, exile the top cards, X cards of target opponent's library. You may play lands and cast spells from among them without paying their mana cost. A really, really powerful card. Obviously, having some utility stuff is just good in any deck, but you want to be able to kind of keep things going, and in a deck like this where you're ideally drawing a bunch of cards, being able to discard a bunch of stuff is not as big of a drawback, where you're able to then have something on the board that's going to let you be consistently drawing in addition to Valgavoth, and then also can kind of just like in a funny way like kind of fuck your opponents over with some of the stuff that you're going after. Archon of Cruelty is another one I really like out of Modern Horizons 2. 6 and 2 black, creature Archon, flying. Whenever it enters the battlefield or attacks, target opponent sacrifices a creature or planeswalker, discards a card, and loses 3 life. Then you draw a card and gain 3 life. A super annoying card. It's very, very unpleasant to play against, but very fun to play. And obviously this is going to trigger, life burn. If there's ways to blink this out, which I don't know how frequently you're going to be doing that in this color combination. But again, we're not just looking for Valgavoth triggers. We're also looking to kind of have a roundabout complete strategy here. And this card is just another good mono black card that is like really aggressive, but also can like do a lot, and it's target opponent, thankfully. So I say that from the balance perspective, like you can't just play this and just screw everybody over all at once, but it's still a good card, especially if you're reanimating it or casting it without paying the mana cost. And Blood Artist is another one I think is a really good card. I pretty much play this card in like 90% of black decks that like it makes even the slightest bit of sense to play it in. But here, Blood Artist or another creature dies, target player loses a life, you gain a life. There's your Valgavoth trigger. If you're popping opponent stuff during their turn, they're sacking stuff, what have you. Blood Artist is just always going to be a solid card to consider including. There's not too much else to say about him. I don't know. There's different variants, I suppose. But yeah, it's just a really good card, and I think it's one that you probably want to include. And it's also only a couple of bucks, so from an upgrade perspective, it's not anything crazy. And a couple of lands, just honorable mentions. I know some people like to build on a budget, some people like to go full force, but there are a lot of really good Rakdos lands you can replace some of the stuff in here with. Obviously, Blood Crypt is really good, Shock Land. Luxury Suite's another one that's pretty good if you can get that. Bloodstained Mire out of Modern Horizons 3. Actually pretty affordable, all things considered, because of the reprints for the fetch lands. So just, some good stuff there that you can kind of pick and choose from that will make the strategy work. And obviously, there are a lot of other upgrades as well. I think people have posted upgrade guides, other creators have posted upgrade guides, so definitely look around and kind of find what works best for your play style. But let's take a look at some of the cards that we can cut. Alright, for the cuts, these are going to be a little bit more loose. I think that there are plenty of changes you can make to the deck, but these just struck me as some of the more obvious ones. I am one of those people who struggles when building a deck because I'll read a card and be like, nah, I gotta keep this in, I might use it. So finding cuts to make can be challenging, and obviously depends on what you like to play and what your preferences are, but there are definitely some that I think are pretty easy cuts. First up, we've got Sadistic Shell Game. I like the card conceptually, but I don't think it really does all that much to advance your deck, and while it's a cool card, it's like, I don't know, it's kind of reliant on the opponents, and it doesn't really work in conjunction with your commander all that well, so I do think Sadistic Shell Game is a pretty easy cut. Rakdos, Lord of Riots is another one that's a decent card for sure. A little bit hindered by the fact that it can't use any colorless mana to be cast, so it's kind of a little bit challenging in some cases to have the right land base to get him out, or to at least guarantee you have the right land base to get him out. But he's decent, but he can't be cast unless an opponent lost life, and while that obviously does work with what this deck's looking to do, we are trying to damage the opponents a lot on their own turns, and obviously that means this card's not necessarily going to be as practical, because we can, obviously it doesn't have flash, can't cast it on the opponent's turn. I think it's a pretty safe cut. Fear of Burning Alive is a new card, actually, from Duskmourn that's included in the deck here, and it's not a bad card, but it costs 6 mana. It does deal damage to the opponent when it enters, and it can also deal damage to opponent's creatures, which is solid. If you deal non-combat damage while having 4 or more card types in the grave, you're dealing that damage to a creature. It's just we're more so looking to damage the opponents here, and this is a pretty costly investment in terms of mana, so while it's a cool card that definitely has a place in certain decks, I think it's a pretty safe cut here. Combustible Gear Hulk is another one that's obviously really good, but it costs a lot and it doesn't do much to advance our strategy. You can deal damage to the opponent, but they could also just choose to let you draw and then not take the damage, and it's kind of slow with this deck, so I would say Combustible Gear Hulk is a pretty easy cut. Seance Board is a card I like a lot. I talked about how good I think it's going to be, but in this deck particularly, it just does not feel as strong. It's more effective if, you're playing a lot of instants and sorceries. Yeah, it can be used for demons, but we're not playing a ton of demons in this deck. We're using some, and obviously our commander is a demon, but I think this is a safe cut, and honestly, you could probably replace it if you really wanted to with like another mana rock that costs the same so that you have more mana acceleration, but in general, I really like Seance Board. I just don't think it's great in this particular deck. Theater of Horrors is another one I think is a pretty good cut as well. Solid card, giving you some impulse draw, pseudo impulse draw, as well as being able to deal damage to the opponent, but it also costs quite a bit to do that, and we've established that there are a lot of cards that can do it for a lot less mana, so I just think it's probably not worth the investment. And then on the land front, Evolving Wilds and Terramorphic Expanse are definitely two you could cut right off the bat for some of those other lands we talked about. The more speed you have, the better, and these obviously do bring cards out tapped, so from a budget perspective, they're okay, but if we're looking to make some upgrades in terms of actually making the deck more viable, those would be some of the first lands I'd cut. And then any other lands really that enter tapped, if you can upgrade them with better lands that either don't enter tapped or are at least typed, have the Swamp Mountain label on it so it can be fetched, there's obviously a lot of room for improvement there. So those are just some of the cuts and some of the upgrades for this deck. Let me know what you guys think. What are you planning on doing? Are there cards I missed that you think would be good? Because if so, drop them in the comments, and then people who watch the video might be able to see them and get some help with their own deck as they're looking for upgrades. But otherwise, I'll catch you guys in the next video. Peace.